The best late-night conservative talk show in America, Sackheads Radio. And listen, there are no people better on the air to give you the best in conservative talk than Sackhead Sean and Sackhead Clint. And we're working on immigration papers for a certain other guy who happens to work here, too. But for those who are tuning in around the world to the best in late-night conservative talk, Sackheads Radio.
Sackheads Radio. Sackheads Radio.
The best late-night conservative talk show in America.
And we're back. Welcome to a special edition of the Sackheads Radio Show. I'm your host, Sackhead Clint, and I have a very special guest today. We are sitting here with Katie Keefer, author of the excellent book for millennials, Let Me Be Clear. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us today. I would like to talk to you a little bit about your book, if you have time. So again, thank you. If you'd like to tell our listeners a little bit about your book and kind of the premise of the book and some of the information in there.
Sure, yeah. Well, it's titled Let Me Be Clear, and the reason behind that is because now it's my generation's, the millennial generation's turn to be clear with our president. He says that quite often, let me be clear. If you like your doctor, you can keep it.
Right.
But that didn't turn out to be the case, especially for millennials. And so what I do in this book is I go back to the era of JFK and to Clinton and show young millennials in an entertaining but still educational way how the Democratic Party has really changed. And the party of Hillary, who is deeply woven into this book with regard to her involvement in Hillary Claire and also Benghazi, their policies are so much more radical than JFK and even her husband Bill's policies in the past.
Right, and one of the things that's interesting, I had a chance to, I haven't read the entire book yet, I apologize,
sure.
but we just met today. But what I read, I did have a chance to peruse some of the chapters in it, and I was very impressed.
Good.
Because it seems like you took a subject that's really dry. There are a lot of millennials that I know don't really, they're not interested in politics, they don't really want to talk about what's happening, and so you really kind of, obviously you speak their language, right? I mean, you're a millennial, and you wrote with that targeted audience in mind. I think you did a very good job.
Thank you.
And so it's something I hope they really enjoy. One of the things I wanted to talk about is because it's kind of near and dear, and we talk about it a lot on the show, is guns.
Good. Okay, good.
And the gun issue. And you mentioned in your book that there's a war on guns. And, in my generation, it was perfectly acceptable to play cowboys and Indians. Yes, I did say Indians. That is politically incorrect. We played cops and robbers, and we had finger guns. Like at school, it was not a big deal. And now there's this war on guns. We have a lot of violence is out there in the media. You can talk about whether it's increased or just the awareness is increased because of reporting and whatnot. But you talk about how you can solve this problem, you think, through more guns and more love, which I think is very interesting, and I'd like to hear more about that. I think our listeners would as well.
There's a chapter in here called Our Gun Tattoos, and I believe that every millennial is tattooed or branded by this administration, and it began really in the Clinton administration, but branded as a potential mass murder, because every time they walk into school, which is also a gun-free zone, which is new since when my parents grew up, they are branded really as a potential criminal. And that's really wrong. We are supposed to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, and now it's the opposite with regard to guns. And so within that chapter, I have a section called A Little Girl Who Grew Up in a Gun Family, and I can totally relate to what you were saying about playing cowboys and Indians. When I was younger, I had almost all male cousins, and so I didn't really have a choice. We would go out and we would play war, and do things, cops and robbers, and you would play with pretend guns. And now, well, I'm from the Midwest originally, and I have a huge hunting family, and that there's that legacy of hunting and respect for the animals as well. And I talk about that and how, because I have had that, I'm fortunate to have that experience, I have a different perspective on guns and firearms that I want to share with millennials who didn't have that opportunity to grow up around them. So they're not so fearful of firearms.
Right. So how do you change that? I mean, how do how do you incorporate or get the millennials to see that guns aren't this big evil thing? I've owned guns my whole life too, and I don't know if I've had some that are broken because I've never had one just spontaneously jump off the table and go kill somebody, which the media seems to think that that's what guns do, right? They spontaneously jump up and go around killing everything. So maybe I just have a bunch of broken guns. They've only fired when I've wanted them to fire.
Right, yeah.
So how do you change that with your generation to say, hey, look, guns aren't bad. As a matter of fact, guns are a reason we have our freedoms today. We have our liberties today. They're a huge part of our culture.
Yes. Well, the millennial generation is actually quite pragmatic, and they're very open to the facts if they feel like if someone's being a straight shooter with them. So one thing I do in that chapter is I go through the 5 most prominent gun lies. Most recently, Barack Obama once again said that we have a high level of violence in this country because of easy access to guns. He said that after the shooting at the church, the African American church, and that's a flat out lie. So young people hear that all the time, and I debunk those lies, but also say, go through the history of gun-free zones. They know that we've actually had more mass violence since we've had gun-free zones in this country, and they don't realize that, because focus less on things that politicians want us to focus on so much, like race, for example, or gender. And if we would focus more on just like loving each other and smiling at each other despite our differences, people would be less suspicious of each other, and we could talk to each other more intimately. And also we have to show more love towards those who have mental illnesses, because all of these mass shootings have occurred by someone who is mentally ill. So we have to find a way to love them by properly caring for them. And these young kids, like Elliot Rogers out in Santa Barbara, they had parents who were extremely wealthy, but they didn't show their kid any attention. He showed obvious signs of mental illness, and yet what did they do? They gave him the BMW that he used as a getaway car. He actually tried
to run people over, and after he stabbed 3, he tried to run people over with the BMW and then shot 3 more.
Right. They allowed him to live alone, and it's the same with Dylan Roof. His parents knew that he had problems, but they allowed him to live alone. They gave him the gun that he had. So you have parents who don't, I would argue, love their children enough to actually spend time with them to make sure that if they're mentally ill, they shouldn't have a firearm. Things like that, those will solve these crimes and eradicate them much faster than saying no guns for anyone.
Right, or even if private citizens had guns, they could also defend themselves and stop this violence. Also, we saw that with the Oklahoma beheadings when the one terrorist, I would say, beheaded that woman, was attempting to do it to behead another one when the owner had a firearm and stopped that attack. And there's been other cases as well. Yeah. And you bring up a great point about the division we have today, where there's this focus on the media about race and we and politics also. And look, we've been guilty of that on our show. We're a partisan show. But we also don't point the finger. We want to have the conversation. It seems like a lot of conversation gets shut down, so you can't engage in that dialogue.
That's true. Yes. We're too sensitive. You have everyone from comedians who are not political at all, like Amy Schumer, who said she made a joke, and she mentioned Latina women. And then you have Donald Trump, who is a presidential candidate, who stated his opinion with regard to immigration, while also saying that legal Hispanics are wonderful and they contribute to our country.
Right.
And people are so sensitive about that. Chris Rock, also a comedian, says he will not go to college campuses anymore because no one laughs at his jokes. He's not talking about politics. He's just talking about things that are funny if you don't take them seriously.
Right.
And so that's another thing that I'm trying to work against, is to make sure that my generation doesn't become too sensitive, that we can laugh at ourselves.
Which people don't do anymore.
No, yeah.
Right? Because it's somebody else's fault, and you can't say that because I'm offended. Right?
Yeah.
One of the twists I really like what you did with this book is you compared Barack Obama to two other prominent Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you were saying, oh, Obama's bad and here's some good Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
You took the same party and said, hey, here's JFK, here's Bill Clinton, and this is why they were okay, and this is why Obama has issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so you were really comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's what I wanted to do, is to have a comparison that no one could shoot down. I also bring up Steve Jobs quite a bit because he was a Democrat, and yet he told Obama that he was doing things wrong. He said, you're going to be a one-term president if you keep doing these things. And it all had to do with regard to taxes and immigration, actually. And yet he was a Democrat. Mm-hmm. And I point that out to young people so that they realize that Obama and Hillary aren't the only version of Democrat out there.
Right. They're really progressive.
Right.
Very progressive.
Yeah. So young people should get involved. Young people have lost a historical level of trust in the office of president just since 2008. And that's because everything they voted for Obama, all the reasons they voted for him, primarily for jobs, to get rid of their student debt, and also to end the wars in the Middle East. All of those things have exacerbated since he became president. So they feel that they can't trust anyone. And so I'm trying to say, don't withdraw, rather get back, get engaged, but just do it with a more, be a little bit more cautious and educate yourself first.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be a key point. The education is huge. And I think our education system has failed a lot of your generation. I mean, even a lot of the history books and syllabus that's being used today is very partisan in nature. And so how do you get around that? How do you engage millennials to actually on their own, instead of just doing the homework and moving on with their day? How do you engage them to self-educate so that they can make the best voting decisions when they're adults and things that are absolutely going to have an impact on their lives?
Yeah. Well, I wrote this book, which again is titled "Let Me Be Clear," as a tool. And a lot of parents and grandparents that have given it to their children, and I've heard feedback from those children or from the parents, and they've said that we've had problems resonating. As a parent, it's hard for me to talk to my child, but there was this one girl, she was about 12 years old, and her dad gave it to her, and she started highlighting things just on her own. And she took it to school, and her English teacher tried to take it away from her, and then her history teacher said, no, I think she should have this. And so you have students like that who the dad just gave the book to her daughter, or his daughter, and she started educating herself. And then I had another girl who read it herself, and then she came and bought another copy for her friend. Oh. So there's stories like that. And there's the best one, though, is there was a young African-American man who used to work for Barack Obama. And he said he lost all hope after he was elected because everything he had worked for this guy, volunteered hours of his time, didn't come to pass. And he came across this book actually in Barnes & Noble, and he read it, and he said, now I feel like I have a sense of direction, and he's more libertarian or conservative leaning now. Okay. So just one person at a time, and then that person goes and tells another person. That's really how I'm trying to change things. Excellent.
Well, very impressed again. What I've read so far, very impressive. I want to thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
The book is Let Me Be Clear, Barack Obama's War on Millennials and One Woman's Case for Hope by Katie Keefer. Please check it out. Do you have a website or anywhere else?
KatieKeefer.com, KIEFFER. But the book is actually available, Let Me Be Clear is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and iBooks. So.
Excellent. So please check it out. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And that's it. This is Sackhead Clint from Sackhead's radio show, and we'll be back a little bit later live from Freedom Fest, Las Vegas, Nevada.